Good morning. We are so glad to be with you all. And I have to say, that session right before this was excellent. It was on journaling, doodling, and it was very stress relieving, which was fantastic. And welcome to our next part of Day of Learning with the Alzheimer's Association, Region 7. We're so excited about what we're going to be sharing today. And I have a distinct honor and privilege of introducing a very important part of the Alzheimer's Association, Dr. Keith Fargo. Dr. Fargo is going to be sharing so much information with us this morning about research and Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And for all of us, this is an area that is so important as far as every part of our mission is so important, but especially the part of research where we are all invested in finding a cure for Alzheimer's and all of the other dementias. So very excited about this. I'd like to introduce Dr. Fargo, who is the Director of Scientific Programs and Outreach for the Alzheimer's Association. And what that means and includes is that he runs the team that writes the facts and figures that are released annually. I'll make sure that that goes in the chat box where you can find all of the facts and figures. He runs that team, which is incredible. He also oversees our TrialMatch program, which we're going to learn a little bit more about further in the presentation. And he also manages the association's activities related to the Longitudinal Early Onset Alzheimer's Disease Study. The acronym for that is LEADS, L-E-A-D-S. So before that, he received his PhD in neuroscience from Indiana University. His postdoc was completed at Loyola University in Chicago, and he was the assistant research professor at Loyola Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Therapeutics. So welcome, Dr. Fargo. We're very blessed that you're spending this time with us on a Saturday.
Oh, thank you so much, Ginny. I appreciate that. I'm the one really who feels blessed to have a chance to be here and join all of you. I'm incredibly excited about what's happening in research. I wish we had all day to talk to you about what's happening in research, but we don't. So we're going to have to spend a little bit of we're really going to have to focus in on a few things. We'll just sort of skim across the surface here, but I've picked out a few things that I think people will be interested in hearing about, and will give people a deeper understanding, I think a richer understanding of exactly where we are in Alzheimer's science and dementia science, and how close are we to finding better therapies and better techniques for determining who is at risk and who may have these various diseases that cause dementia. So that's what we're going to focus in on today. I did want to start though by sort of echoing something that Jenny said here, which is really about these two parts of our mission. Some people ask me about the mission symbol that we use that you can see on the left-hand side of your screen here, and this is really representative of both kinds of things that we're doing in Alzheimer's and dementia. And on the left-hand side, you can see that is representative of a human head. And that reminds us all of why we're doing what we're doing, that it's about people. It's about people who are struggling with this disease and other diseases that cause dementia, and also about hoping to ensure, or helping to ensure rather, that fewer and fewer people in the future, and ultimately zero people in the future, will experience Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And we do that through science and research. And that's what you see represented on the right-hand side of the mission symbol here, which is a beaker to most people. If we do have some science nerds with us today, like myself, you'll recognize that that's a Florence flask. But most people think of that as a beaker, so it's fine. That's fine. So a human head and a beaker is what we've got for our mission symbol. Now, I am going to talk to you about some of the really cutting edge things that are happening today in research, but I want to start by just laying some groundwork, because I know there are probably people joining us today or watching the recording who may not be as familiar yet with some of the basics of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So I just want to make sure that we have a chance to put everybody on an even footing before we jump ahead to some of the more cutting edge types of things. So the first thing I want to talk to you about here is that what we call the continuum of cognitive impairment. And many of you, if you've had Alzheimer's or another dementia in your family, you know there's a continuum, right? It's not like a heart attack or a stroke where you wake up one day and all of a sudden there's this negative, health event. Really, this is something that develops slowly over time. And a number of stages or phases are involved in that. And most of us, almost all of us, are on the left-hand side of this continuum where we would call ourselves cognitively unimpaired. And that means that our thinking and memory are performing to the level that we would expect for someone of our age. And I think that's an important point that I want to make, which is that dementia, Alzheimer's disease, these are not normal parts of aging. Plain and simple, period, they're not. They are generally caused or always caused by some kind of underlying situation that's happening in the brain when you begin to have these cognitive impairments. But it's important for us to differentiate between something we call normal age related cognitive decline and cognitive impairment. And what I mean by that is almost all of us are experiencing some kind of cognitive decline as we age. I'll be honest here and tell you I'm 47. So for me, this started about 20 years ago. You may be right. You may be surprised to know that you're generally at the height of your cognitive powers at about the age of 27. And then after that, most of us begin to experience some kind of gradual cognitive decline. But that is not the same thing as cognitive impairment. When we're talking about cognitive impairment, we're talking about loss of cognition that is worse than would be expected for a person's age range, and also is starting to get over into the line to make us suspect that something may be happening in the brain that will ultimately cause a very negative outcome, because these diseases that cause dementia, unfortunately, are fatal diseases. And so I want to point out here that this is a continuum. You don't sort of wake up one day with it, and also that this is different from normal age. It makes it very difficult to study, because how do you know when a person's cognitive decline is really just normal age related cognitive decline, which isn't anything to be worried about? It may cause some embarrassment, but it's not anything to be worried about. And then
Mhm.
when does that cross the line over into impairment? Well, the medical community has really defined a few cut points for this, and there's I. Now, I'm a little bit unhappy about the word mild cognitive impairment because it indicates that it's a mild condition. And in people who have mild cognitive impairment, they might disagree with that.
Mhm.
People with mild cognitive impairment are having real problems, real measurable problems, objectively measurable on paper and pencil tests with their cognition that is worse than normal for their age. But it's not yet begun to interfere with activities of daily living. And when we say activities of daily living, we're talking about things like feeding yourself, dressing yourself, handling your own money, taking your own medications. Those are all activities of daily living. And occasionally, we're all going to have a forgetful day. And that's fine, and you can cope with that. But if it's problematic, it's mild cognitive impairment. Once you begin to experience difficulties in your activities of daily living, where you need help with someone to help you with your medication, your money, etc., then that's when we start to say, okay, now we're talking about dementia. And I want to make a couple of important points here. Mild cognitive impairment is a risk factor for dementia, but mild cognitive impairment by itself does not mean that a person will certainly develop dementia. You can have mild cognitive impairment and never move beyond that. You can have mild cognitive impairment and actually go back to being cognitively unimpaired if there's a treatable medical condition that's causing the mild cognitive impairment. But once you enter that dementia stage, that's when we get really worried, because dementia, unfortunately, right now is not reversible through any means that we have yet. So, what do we mean when we're talking about dementia? Well, I've already kind of unpacked this a little bit by talking about activities of daily living, loss of cognition, which is memory and thinking, but also judgment, orientation to time and place. So, not getting lost, for example, in familiar environments. And what you're hearing me describe is really a set of symptoms, right? So, when we talk about dementia, we're talking about a set of symptoms. We may call that a syndrome. So this is what a person experiences who has one of these underlying brain diseases. But we have to be careful to differentiate the syndrome from the underlying diseases that cause that syndrome. And so when we're talking about the underlying diseases, that's when we get into talking about things like Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body diseases that can cause dementia. Frontotemporal degeneration can cause dementia. There are a whole host of other things as well, something called progressive supranuclear palsy or PSP. There's something called corticobasal degeneration. All of these things can cause dementia, but you might think of Alzheimer's, vascular, Lewy body, and frontotemporal as being the main four. And in reality, most people who are of the age to develop dementia, frequently by the time they develop that dementia, there's really more than one of these things happening in the brain. And we call that mixed dementia. And most of the time, a case of mixed dementia includes both Alzheimer's related brain changes as well as vascular brain changes or changes with the blood vessels in the brain. So let's talk a little bit about Alzheimer's disease specifically. And I'm doing this because we're going to talk a little bit more about treatments for Alzheimer's and potential new treatments for Alzheimer's later in the presentation. But I do want to stop and make the point here that even though we go publicly by the word Alzheimer's Association, our full legal name is actually the Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders Association. And that really should indicate to everyone who knows that at least, that the work that we're doing is not just for Alzheimer's disease, it's for any cause of dementia. And that includes the care and support work we are doing. So if you or someone you know or love has vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, we are still here for you. We are here, our support services are here for you, and we are supporting research to eradicate those forms of dementia as well. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and focus in a little bit here on Alzheimer's disease. And when we talk about Alzheimer's disease, we're really talking about the changes that happen in the brain that were first discovered by Alois Alzheimer, who you see here on the left, a little bit over 100 years ago. And the individual in the middle, her name was Auguste Deter. And Auguste Deter was the first person ever described to have Alzheimer's disease. Now, she was not the first person to have Alzheimer's disease. It's been with us since time immemorial, but it wasn't called Alzheimer's disease until the early 1900s. And that's because Alois and Auguste were living in this time of scientific revolution. Now, the revolution at that time was all about better microscopes and better staining techniques, which allowed Dr. Alzheimer, after Auguste unfortunately did pass away from her Alzheimer's, what we now know as Alzheimer's. He took her brain out and he looked under these new microscopes with these new staining techniques. And what he saw and reported on is what we still consider to be the three primary hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And those include amyloid plaques, which you can see here as these dark brown spots on the right-hand side, tau tangles, which you can see as, it's a little difficult to see, but you can see small parts, in the neurons here, or these nerve cells, which happens when this tau protein clumps together and forms what we call these tangles. And we call them tangles because if you look at them under a high-powered microscope, they actually look like tangled up hair. So that's why they're called tau tangles. And then the third thing that he saw was just shrinkage of the brain, which you don't actually even need a microscope for. You can see this with the naked eye in an advanced case of Alzheimer's disease or another brain disease that causes dementia. But to this day, those are the three primary hallmarks: amyloid plaques, tau tangles, and neurodegeneration, which is the shrinkage of brain tissue as the neurons begin to die off. Now, how big of a problem is this? Well, it's really enormous. So today, more than just today, as we're speaking, more than 5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's that has already progressed through the mild cognitive impairment stage and into that dementia stage. 5 million Americans today. We know that Alzheimer's disease is the sixth leading cause of death among Americans of any age. And if you look at Americans 65 and older, it's the fifth leading cause of death. Or if you look just at women of any age, it's also the fifth leading cause of death because it appears to hit women harder than it does men. We know that this is the most expensive disease facing our society today. As Americans, we spend a little over $250 billion every year taking care of people who have Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Actually, 300 billion every year, so over $250 billion. And that's going to increase. We know that the baby boomers are really entering the age of increased risk, and barring any kinds of medical breakthroughs, the prevalence of Alzheimer's is set to skyrocket in coming years, and that's going to come with an increase in cost as well, up to 1.1 trillion. So this is not only a societal problem like we've just laid out here, but of course the human toll for the family who's experiencing this or an individual who's experiencing this, we really can't place a value on that. It's just an enormous toll that it takes. So where are we in terms of the available therapies? Well, the therapies that we have today are, I guess I can describe them as less than ideal. I'm glad that we have them. I thank God that we have these therapies to help people. But it's important to note that these therapies really only treat symptoms today. So if you want to use an analogy, it's a little bit like cancer and pain. You know, back in the bad old days when we didn't have anything to do for a person's cancer, the only thing we could do was support their symptoms for a while. So let's say you had a cancer that was causing you pain, we could give you pain medications, but it was not stopping the cancer. And unfortunately, that's where we are today with Alzheimer's disease and the other brain diseases that cause dementia, is that we can give people these supportive therapies to help their cognition for a period of time, but they're not slowing down the underlying brain diseases, unfortunately. In the case of Alzheimer's, the plaques continue to build up, the tangles continue to build up, and the brain tissue, unfortunately, continues to be lost. So what are we doing about that? Well, I'm happy to report, actually, we have some really great news in that the last several years, thanks to the activity of people just like you, we have been able to convince the administrations to increase federal funding for Alzheimer's disease by really historic proportions. If you go back to 2011, we had coming from the NIH, and this, I want to be clear here, not coming to the Alzheimer's Association, but going out to researchers in universities and research institutes all across the country. That's where these NIH dollars go to. We were at less than $500 million a year 10 years ago. And a lot of people thought that was about where it was going to stay. And then you can see, well, you can't really see it on this graph, but I can tell you that a couple of key legislative things happened in 2010, 2011, and then again in 2015 with the passage of the National Alzheimer's Project Act and then the Alzheimer's Accountability Act, which led to these increases in research funding. So you can see that we have essentially quintupled the amount of research funding that is now available for Alzheimer's and other dementias to these researchers across the country. It is important though. So by the way, if you've been part of that through either advocating through the Alzheimer's Association or joining our sister organization, the Alzheimer's Impact Movement, thank you, because that's what drove all of this. So we're in a good we're in a good place, but I want to point out that those dollars through the NIH stay largely within the United States, which I fully understand because those are tax dollars and people want their tax dollars to not only support the research, but support the research that's happening right here at home. I understand that. But I also understand that Alzheimer's and dementia are global problems, and they're only going to be solved by a global response. And I'm very proud to say that those of you who've helped raise these critical dollars for the Alzheimer's Association, that these are being utilized all across the globe. Thanks to your efforts, today we have more than $185 million of grants in force, supporting more than 500 research projects in 30 different countries. That's something that you can all be extremely proud of. It actually makes us the largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's and dementia research in the world. And even if you count federal governments and you look at the impact of various research funding programs through doing things like measuring publications that come out of grants, through measuring things like patents that come out of grants. We're placed number 3 behind only the federal government in the United States and the government of China. Now, I'd rather be number 1 than number 3, but I'll take number 3 there. Yeah, that's pretty good. So what has all of this led to? What is this doing in terms of research? Well, we're really in a golden age of dementia research today, and many, many discoveries have been made recently that have completely transformed the way that we approach research into Alzheimer's and other dementias. One of the most important developments is the discovery of biomarkers that can show us who is experiencing these hallmark brain changes related to Alzheimer's during life. And do you remember I told you that when Alois Alzheimer and Auguste Dieter were living, that they were living through this time of scientific revolution that allowed them to understand what was causing Auguste's dementia symptoms. Now, that was incredibly important, but for most of a century, we had to still rely upon autopsy. In other words, you could have dementia symptoms during life, and it may look very much like Alzheimer's, but in reality, it may have been vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, or something else that was causing those symptoms. So you had to wait until a person passed away. That is absolutely not ideal when you're trying to run clinical trials to find a medication that will actually change the course of the underlying brain disease, because you have to ask yourself, who are we going to put in this clinical trial and how will we measure the results of the clinical trial? And when it's all based on symptoms, then you get symptomatic medications, and that's what we have. Well, I'm proud to tell you that thanks to people just like you who helped us raise these dollars, we were able to make a grant to Bill Klunk at the University of Pittsburgh about 15 years ago now, actually, to develop the first ever tool to visualize amyloid in the human brain during life. And that's what you're seeing here on the left-hand side. These are images from a human brain during life, not autopsy data now, but we can now see inside the brain while you're still alive to see, do you have these plaques? Do you have these tangles? Are you losing brain tissue? And that really allows us to completely change the kinds of questions that we can ask of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and really test new kinds of therapies. So where that has led us, and many of you may have seen this in the news, is that we're now at a point where disease modifying medications are being developed for Alzheimer's disease. Now, we're not there yet for the other causes, but with Alzheimer's disease, because there's been more research over time, it's a little bit more mature. And one of the medications that was developed using these new techniques of amyloid PET imaging, along with others, is called aducanumab. Now, I know that's a terrible, terrible name, and many of you are going to trip over it. Good news is this is being recorded, so you can watch it as many times as you want, but it's called aducanumab. This is a medication that is designed to target the amyloid plaques in a person's brain. Now, how do biomarkers play a role there? Well, when you look at the old clinical trials, 25 to 30% of the people in those trials, their dementia was caused by something else rather than Alzheimer's disease. And it's not that those things aren't important, it's just that you really need to be able to measure are getting the people with the disease that you're trying to treat in the clinical trial for that disease.
Mhm.
And using these amyloid PET imaging techniques, that's what Biogen, which is the company who is developing this drug, did. They used the PET imaging first to make sure that everyone who went into the trial actually had this Alzheimer's related brain change, the amyloid plaques, rather than other causes of dementia. And then they also used the amyloid PET imaging during the trial to measure, are we removing plaques from the brain with this drug? And the answer appears to be yes. The people who took this drug, their plaque level was reduced. Now, I want to be very clear here. This is not what we might think of as a cure. Okay, if you take a
Okay.
person who already has lots of amyloid plaques in the brain and is already experiencing symptoms, which was the case in this clinical trial,
Mhm.
it did not completely stop the disease progression, but it does appear to slow the disease progression, which is far more than what we have today.
Okay.
The another thing that we learned is that the beginnings of the brain changes start about 20 years before Alzheimer's disease symptoms set in. And that is, it's scary to some people because you think, gosh, if I'm 75 today and I may be, on the road to Alzheimer's, I may have these plaques in my head right now and not even know it. Well, that's true, but I'm going to challenge you to think about that, not in a scary fashion, but as a 20-year window of hope. That is a 20-year window where if we can find people who are at high risk for developing Alzheimer's and treat them with a medication that may stop that, then it begins to look a lot like heart disease today. We don't wait until you have a heart attack or a stroke to check your cholesterol. We check
Mhm.
your cholesterol early so that we can do something about it before you get to that negative clinical outcome. Now,
Okay.
very similarly, also with heart disease, we believe that the future of Alzheimer's treatment is probably going to include both medications and lifestyle changes. And so we're studying that as well. Oh, sorry about that. Looks like we skipped ahead a few slides. Let's see, I'm going to go to, you know what? This is actually fine. So we believe that the future will involve both of these.
Okay.
And to talk about that a little bit, I want to tell you about a study called the Sprint Mind study. Now, the Sprint Mind study was all about controlling blood pressure. And what we found in that study is that people who had aggressive blood pressure treatment were less likely to develop mild cognitive impairment or dementia over time. Now, that is enormous. Now, that
Mhm.
is enormous because it's an immediate opportunity to change people's lives and reduce their risk for developing cognitive impairment and dementia.
Mhm.
But it also got the scientific community thinking about, all right, well, so the heart is involved, heart health is involved. What if we do not just this blood pressure medication for people who have high blood pressure, but we also try to intervene with other things that we know are good for your heart health. For example, exercise. For example, nutrition. But then also intervening with things that we know are good for your cognitive health, such as social stimulation, such as cognitive stimulation. And
Mhm.
the Alzheimer's Association launched a clinical trial called US Pointer. This is a $35 million 2-year clinical trial being run all across the country, utilizing this combination of interventions that are based on heart health, but also cognitive health. I
Okay.
can let you know that there's actually a site right there in Texas at Houston. So, very exciting time for that.
Mhm.
And this is not just in the United States. We have actually convened a consortium, a global consortium of countries that are running very similar studies to this so that we can have answers not just about will it work here, but how can we modify this program to see that it can be culturally appropriate and culturally acceptable to people in other countries who have different dietary patterns, they may exercise in different ways, etc. And so the countries here in purple are countries that are in the late stages of planning or have already launched their study that's similar
Mm.
to US Pointer. And in
Mhm.
orange, these are countries that are part of the consortium that are in the late stages, or sorry, earlier stages of planning. And so if you look here, yeah, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but India is part of this. And
Okay.
boy, we can't wait to get India because we already have China. And if we can get
Okay.
India as well, that's
Okay.
an enormous proportion of the world's population. Now, I just have a couple more slides here. Ginny mentioned earlier TrialMatch. This is a great way for anyone to learn more about clinical trials that they might want to participate in. And I would encourage all of you to sign up. And you can do that. The simplest way is alz.org/trial match, or you can also call our 800 number and just press 1, and that will connect you with someone who is with the trial match service. Now, this doesn't sign you up to be in a clinical trial, but it takes the more than 300 studies that exist today and reduces it to a manageable number based on information that you give us. So if you tell us, for example, that you are 56, we are not going to show you studies that are only taking people up to 55, right? So what you get is a customized list of trials. We don't share your information with any researchers. So it's up to you once you get that list to say, I like this one, I don't like it. And if it's something that you like, we give you the contact information for the clinical trial site. Now, the
Okay.
last thing I want to do is to encourage you all to download the Alzheimer's Association Science Hub app. This is going to give you curated research information, and it's going to give you expert viewpoint and commentary on some of the things that you may see in the news, because there's lots of information about dementia research in the news, but sometimes it helps to have someone say, well, one way to look at this is X, another way to look at it is Y. So the Science Hub app will help you make sense of that kind of information. And you can find that both in the Google Play Store and in the Apple Play Store. So I just want to
Okay.
thank you. I believe we have some time for Q&A here that Ginny Funk is going to moderate for us. Thank you.
We do. Oh my goodness, Dr. Fargo. First, I want to reassure you that we have plenty of time. We did have a set time for this, but this is such an incredible topic and so much information that you just reviewed. So we have plenty of time. And thank you so much for all of your knowledge and everything that you do, and also in the way that you share that information with us. The chat has just been lighting up with comments about how exciting this is, and
Great.
also it's very, you lay it out in a way where the rest of us can really understand this if we are not, as you said, science geeks, etc. So
Which I don't mean
um,
as a bad thing. I'm a science geek, so join
right.
me.
Exactly. So, oh, there's so much you just asked. One of my very favorite slides that you showed was the one on the changes just in the last 10 years as far as the amount of funding for research. Can you share with us a little bit about? We get questions about, okay, is that just specific to Alzheimer's disease, or does that incorporate other types of the most prevalent dementias?
Very good question. So that graph is all NIH dollars that go to research into any kind of dementia. So that
Okay.
includes Alzheimer's, but also all of the other brain diseases and conditions that can cause dementia.
Okay. And um, not going in any order because you just covered so much information, but when you talk about trial match, what are some of the things that you might find in trial match as far as I'll just share an example. When I first came to the association and when trial match started, I signed up, and I have met people in the community who are a little hesitant when you talk about research because they don't really know, what does that mean? What are you going to We get all kinds of comments. What are you going to do to my brain, etc. I actually got a little ping that I was a match for a study, and it was an online. I didn't even have to leave my desk. It was an online um, survey. So, what do you think is something that we can all do to encourage people to, yes, sign up for trial match? And again, you just talked about how important it is that for all of the research that you just reviewed, it takes people to be involved in those studies.
Yeah, that's right. It does. And most studies have difficulty actually finding enough people to complete. Now, I want to be clear here that we are not going to ask anybody, and we don't ask anyone to do anything that they're uncomfortable with. And some people are uncomfortable with taking an experimental medication. I completely get that. That may not be for you. As Ginny mentioned, there are other kinds of studies that are on trial match as well, including things that you can do from the comfort of your own home. It may be as simple as filling out a survey, potentially sending in a cheek swab from a kit that you'll be sent so that they can do some genetic analysis and see how that affects people's answers on the survey, or maybe some cognitive tests that they take online, et cetera. So those are, now if you're not comfortable sharing genetic information, that's fine too. There are some things that are just surveys. There are caregiver studies. There are lifestyle intervention studies. There are many, many studies. Literally, if you are 18 and you have a brain, there is a study on trial match that would be potentially be a good fit for you. So what I would ask people to do is go into trial match, answer a few questions, take a look at the study list that you get back, and then decide for yourself, is this something I want to be involved with or not? And if it is, that's a great way for you to get directly involved in the fight against Alzheimer's disease and the fight against every other dementia. If that's not for you, so many other ways for us to help you get involved. You can walk, you can become an advocate, you can join AIM, you can take part in the longest day, which is coming up here in just a few days. So lots of ways for you to get involved. If you are interested in those research studies, though, Trial Match is a really easy way to get more information. Doesn't sign you up to be in a
Excellent.
study. It just allows us to send you more information about studies that you might want to join.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And as you did bring up, in June is our event, the longest day, and then of course we have walks in the fall. And we do get asked, do those types of events support? Does any of that money go towards research?
Absolutely, it absolutely does. Any dollar that comes to the Alzheimer's Association, unless the person has told us, I only want this to go to the care and support activities, et cetera, if it's just a general donation to the Alzheimer's Association, that supports everything we do, including research. And you can also restrict where you want your dollars to go. As I mentioned, you could tell us only put this toward the care and support activities. You can also make a donation that supports just the research activities. It's really up to you. But any general dollar that comes in through, for example, walk or longest day, that supports everything we do, including the scientific activities.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. We have had, as you were talking about genes and genetics, we've had some questions come in. So, is dementia and including Alzheimer's disease, are those genetic or lifestyle driven? What do we know about where does this come from? Why do some people develop Alzheimer's and some don't?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is it's a little bit of both. So there are genetic components to Alzheimer's disease, but the vast majority of people do not have a form that we would consider genetically deterministic. In other words, it's not the same as Huntington's disease, where if you have the genetic issue, then you're going to get the disease. It's not like that, except for a very tiny group of people who have what we call deterministic mutations. This is vanishingly rare. However, genetics do play a role in a lot of people through genes like ApoE4 and many other genes. But those aren't the kinds of genetic changes where it's a sure thing. It may increase your risk or decrease your risk. And the good news is we're seeing a lot of research that shows that healthy lifestyle habits can actually counteract that genetic risk in many people. We saw some reports at our annual research conference just last year, for example, to that effect. So, no matter your genes, no matter your history, no matter your risk factors, there are things that you can do to reduce your risk and take your cognitive health in your own hands.
Okay, thank you so much. We also had another question come in that if African American individuals and Hispanics, Latinx are at an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, are those particular areas where, again, research is so much more research is needed, and part of what we need to do to encourage individuals to understand more about how, again, to unlock this and to find a cure for this, we need participants.
100%. And I want to start by saying that there has been a long history, not just in the United States, but around the world, of research abuses that we have to admit to and just understand that those did happen. Things like Tuskegee experiment, etc. So it is understandable that many people worry that they may be putting themselves at extra risk by participating in this kind of research. Now, can I guarantee that there will never be research abuse like that again? Of course, I cannot guarantee that. But and I have to be honest about that. But what I can tell you is that there are more protections in place today to prevent research abuse than there ever has been before in human history. I can also tell you that we don't know why African Americans and Latinx individuals are at increased risk. We simply don't know. We have some hints, but we don't know as much as we need to know. We also don't know whether some of these genetic relationships and biomarker relationships that we've talked about are the same in African Americans and Latinx as they are in people of Caucasian or European ancestry. And here's the problem:
Okay.
without participation from everyone, we'll never know. We will never know without research participation from all communities. And yes, we ask that everyone participate in research. And I'm going to challenge you, though, to think about that again, not as just something that we're coming to you and asking you for. I challenge you to think about it as your right to participate. It is critical that when we get treatments and preventions, that they work for everyone. And the only way that we know that they'll work for everyone is if everyone has joined us in participating in the studies that lead to those treatments and preventions. And it is your right to take part in that research the same as everyone else to ensure that the treatments and preventions that we find will benefit all.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And just we just appreciate you so much. I'm so glad that this is recorded. I know we've had several more questions that have come in. Again, you said we can go get information at Science Hub as well as on our website, alz.org/research. And please reach out to the Alzheimer's Association. I just one more thing I want to say. We get asked about, well, is this a cure, or is this, we saw something on the web, and what I try to sort of think about what you would say is that when we have true breakthroughs, like some of the amazing things you've talked about today, the Alzheimer's Association is going to be the entity that shouts it from the rooftops. So make sure that you are getting this information from a reliable resource, such as the Alzheimer's Association. And if you hear something, call our helpline and say, hey, I heard this. What is this real or not? It's just so important. So thank you so much for everything. We really,
Thank you.
really appreciate you.
Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Jonathan Barker, your Walk to End Alzheimer's chairman. I'm out here at this year's new walk venue, and it's a little bit slow right now, but come October 24th, we're going to be turning Six Flags Fiesta Texas purple. I'm very excited about this new opportunity, and I'm even more excited to announce that not only is the walk going to be inside Six Flags, but they're offering us free parking for all participants, as well as the option to purchase a half-price ticket to stay for the rest of the day. We're really excited about the opportunity to grow, and we look forward to seeing you out here at the walk on October 24th. Y'all have a great day, and we'll see y'all soon.